Part 1: The False Glamour. The air in the grand ballroom of the Blackstone was thick with the scent of lilies, expensive champagne, and the suffocating weight of judgment. Eleanor Elia Hayes, 28 years old, a pediatric nurse, and a single mother, felt the judgment most acutely. It clung to the satin of her simple sapphire dress like Chicago humidity, a stark contrast to the blinding white and diamond sparkle of her older sister, Caroline's, wedding day. Ellie stood near a colossal floral arrangement, sipping a glass of water, her gaze drifting toward the dance floor where her 5-year-old daughter, Clara, was being twirled by her Uncle Thomas. Clara, a small whirlwind of pink taffeta and boundless joy, was the only thing that made the annual family gathering tolerable, a testament to Ellie's fierce, unwavering commitment to a life that her family perpetually viewed as a tragic mistake. The Hayes family name was synonymous with old Chicago money, the kind that didn't need to flaunt its wealth because everyone already knew it was there. But Ellie had broken the mold. She had walked away from medical school in her final year when she realized she was pregnant. That decision, made with conviction and the certainty of a mother's heart, had been an open wound to her parents ever since. "Eleanor, darling. Still standing by the hydration station?" The voice belonged to her Aunt Vivian, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes and whose diamond tennis bracelet was a weapon of passive aggression. "Just enjoying the atmosphere, Aunt Vivian," Ellie replied, offering a polite smile that felt brittle on her lips. "Yes, well, it's certainly something. A shame you couldn't have held on to the residency path. Though, I suppose, a nurse is still a very respectable position. It certainly pays the bills for that little apartment, doesn't it?" Vivian paused, leaning in conspiratorially. "We all just want you to be secure, sweetie. For Clara's sake. It must be so difficult, doing it all alone." Ellie swallowed the retort. It was difficult, yes, but not because she had failed, it was difficult because she was constantly fighting against the gravitational pull of their elitist pity. The arrival of her ex-husband, Brandon Scott, shattered what little composure she had left. He strode into her vicinity, sleek and arrogant in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his eyes scanning the room, not for her, but for someone important. He hadn't RSVP'd, naturally. He was here to network, to collect contacts, and perhaps, to cause trouble. He spotted her and sneered, an expression that used to turn her stomach but now only hardened her resolve. "Ellie. You actually wore that rag." "It's a dress, Brandon. And it's my sister's wedding. Keep it civil." "Civil?" He laughed, a low, dismissive sound. He lowered his voice, the menace in it familiar. "I hear you're still pushing bedpans at St. Jude's. Still scraping by, aren't we? I told you, Elle. You throw away a medical degree and tie yourself down with a kid you can barely afford, you never get out of the dirt. You belong here, next to the water, reminding everyone of the life you wasted." He gestured vaguely at the opulent room, then back at her, his implication clear, she was a pauper at a feast, a cautionary tale. He was about to continue his tirade, no doubt escalating to a veiled threat about custody and alimony, when the air around them seemed to drop 20 degrees. A presence materialized at Brandon's shoulder, a man whose tailored midnight blue suit seemed less like clothing and more like a second, impossibly smooth skin. He was tall, dark-haired, and possessed a face carved from Italian marble, perfect, remote, and dangerously beautiful. He moved with a subtle, predatory grace that commanded immediate attention, silencing Brandon mid-sentence. This was Dante Volpe. He didn't look at Brandon. His entire focus was on Ellie, his dark, compelling eyes sweeping over her face, then settling into a gaze of possessive intensity that instantly made the sapphire dress feel like a bespoke gown. "Cara," his voice was a low, resonant rumble, an accent that spoke of old Europe and effortless power. It was the kind of voice that made promises and issued commands in the same breath. He placed a hand, a large, warm, heavily ringed hand, on the small of Ellie's back, a simple gesture that felt like a declaration of ownership. Brandon, caught off guard, stammered, "Who the hell are you?" Dante finally spared him a glance, utterly devoid of recognition or interest. "I am the man who is currently enjoying the company of my fiancée. And you, clearly, are nothing." He didn't raise his voice, yet the dismissal was absolute. He gently steered Ellie a step away, creating an undeniable barrier between her and Brandon. Brandon sputtered, but the sheer, effortless authority emanating from Dante forced him to retreat, defeated and bewildered. The entire interaction lasted 10 seconds, and it was the most effective protection Ellie had experienced in years. Dante leaned down, his breath warm against her ear. "Eleanor Hayes. I apologize for the necessary aggression. But I believe we have an opportunity here." Ellie's heart was hammering, but she found herself oddly calm in the shadow of his immense confidence. "An opportunity? You just claimed to be my fiancé, Mr. Volpe. Dante Volpe." He straightened, the mask of charming calculation firmly in place. "And yes, a very urgent opportunity. Your family, I observe, uses social status as a weapon. And my associates," he nodded toward a group of stern-faced older men in the corner who were watching him with palpable frustration, "use marriage as a business contract." He continued, his voice dropping further, turning their conversation into a confidential secret whispered amid the noise of the party. "They insist I take a wife to solidify a particular business alliance. I refuse. They are being tiresome. And you, Miss Hayes, were just insulted publicly by a pig who clearly has no respect for you or your position. Get to the point, Mr. Volpe. The point is this: pretend to be my fiancé for the rest of this evening. Play the part of the devoted, soon-to-be married partner. It stops my associates' pressure, and it stops your family's pity and the humiliation from your ex-husband. I will be your shield. In return, I will ensure that man never addresses you again this evening." It was insane. He was insane. But the sheer relief of watching Brandon scurry away was intoxicating. And the way his dark, dangerous aura had cut through the snobbery of the room was irresistible. He was offering her a night of peace in a battlefield of judgment. "One condition," Ellie said, her voice surprisingly steady. "You do the talking. You invent the story." I just smile and nod. Dante's lip curved in a half-smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, a gesture that made him look like a satisfied predator. Perfetto. A silent beauty, and a man obsessed. I can certainly work with that. And so, the performance began. He took her hand, his touch warm and firm, pulling her gently toward the main mingling area. The movement drew all eyes. He introduced her to his associates, the men who had been pressuring him, not as Ellie Hayes, nurse, but as Eleanor Hayes, a woman he had pursued relentlessly for months. "She is not interested in the businesses of the world," Dante announced, his gaze fixed on Ellie with a fabricated devotion that was alarmingly convincing. "Her world is one of light, of healing. She is the anchor that reminds me what I am protecting. Our wedding will be quiet, private, and soon." He created a narrative of sophisticated, high-stakes romance. She was a talented, almost monastic pediatric nurse who shunned the spotlight, while he, the successful businessman, was trying to lure her out of her quiet life. He painted her withdrawal from the spotlight as a virtue, a rare jewel he was determined to keep for himself. Ellie's family was reeling. Her mother, who had spent the entire evening whispering about Ellie's poor choices, was now forced to listen as Dante described his immense respect for Ellie's dedication to medicine. When her father finally cornered them, attempting to pry into Dante's business dealings, Dante deflected with smooth, unassailable grace. "Hayes, you are a traditional man, I respect that. You must understand that Eleanor and I operate on different timelines. She has been my light in a very dark year. I will ensure her security, and the security of her daughter is absolute. That is my only public statement on the matter." The mention of Clara, handled with such authority and acceptance, made Ellie's throat tighten. He played the part so flawlessly that by the time they reached the receiving line, her sister Caroline was openly envious. "He's terrifying, Ellie. But utterly gorgeous. And those rings. Are they Volpe family crests?" Ellie simply gave a demure, mysterious smile. "You'd have to ask him, Caro. He keeps his secrets close." As the evening wound down, Dante led her to a secluded corner overlooking the city lights. The performance was nearly over, and the sudden quiet felt heavy. "The verdict, Miss Hayes," Dante murmured, leaning against the velvet rope. "Was my defense adequate?" "Adequate?" Ellie laughed, a genuine, relieved sound. "You were a masterpiece, Mr. Volpe. My mother is already planning how to invite you to Christmas. You turned my shame into a scandalous triumph." Dante offered her his glass of scotch, which she politely declined. "My associates are neutralized for the night. They now believe I am committed to a woman who will never involve herself in my affairs. A saint, if you will, who keeps the serpent from going too far into the darkness." He paused, his eyes holding hers in the dim light, the playful nature of the agreement suddenly dissipating. "But, Miss Hayes, I noticed that the pig, your ex-husband, is waiting in the lobby. He may have retreated, but men like that view silence as weakness. He will be back for his final, self-serving attack." He stepped closer, his presence enveloping her. "The performance was a success, but the problem is not solved. It merely moved locations. I need this engagement facade to continue for one more month. I will pay you a generous sum that will stabilize your finances and provide for your daughter's future education. In return, I will ensure that Brandon Scott vanishes from your life entirely. No threats, no custody battles, just silence. Do we have a deal, Eleanor Hayes?" Part 2, The Approach of the Underworld. Ellie woke the morning after the wedding feeling a profound, if fragile, sense of peace. The sapphire dress was hung neatly in her small closet, but the phantom scent of Dante Volpe's expensive cologne lingered on her skin, and the image of his dark, commanding eyes was burned into her memory. He had offered her more than money, he had offered her an impenetrable shield against Brandon's relentless psychological warfare and the suffocating judgment of her family. The decision was less about the wealth and more about the stability it promised Clara. She had the means to pay off her crippling student loans, fix her ancient, sputtering car, and secure a substantial fund for Clara's future education. Brandon was a known variable, a self-serving, predictable threat. Dante Volpe was a dangerous unknown, a man who smelled like authority and felt like sin, but he was also a man who had acted decisively in her defense. She met Dante the following afternoon at a discreet, sun-drenched cafe he owned in the Gold Coast, just one of his many carefully curated, legitimate fronts. The contrast between the opulent wedding, her humble apartment, and this quiet, sophisticated place was jarring. The contract he presented was shockingly simple, printed on high-quality parchment. It stipulated 1 month of public appearances as his devoted fiancée, absolute discretion regarding his personal affairs, and total cooperation with his security team. The compensation was astronomical, enough to irrevocably change her life. "The term is 30 days, Eleanor," Dante said, his gaze fixed on her. He had shed the tuxedo for a charcoal gray suit that somehow looked more intimidating. "You act the part of the woman I am obsessed with. You accept my protection. You do not ask questions you do not wish to know the answer to." "And Brandon Scott?" Ellie asked, her pen hovering over the signature line. "He is a pest," Dante stated, dismissively. I have already begun the necessary motions. He will find himself audited, his credit frozen, and his employment opportunities drastically curtailed. He will be occupied with keeping himself out of debtor's prison, which will leave him no time to worry about you or Clara. He will vanish. That promise, the final, absolute removal of Brandon from her life, was what sealed it. She took a deep breath, centered herself, and signed the document. Dante's lip curved slightly. Welcome to the family, Eleanor. Over the next 3 days, their artificial relationship was established with the chilling efficiency of a military operation. Dante, though all business, was surprisingly observant. He arranged for a subtle security detail around her apartment and the hospital, which she barely noticed but instinctively felt. He sent massive floral arrangements to the pediatric ward, complete with notes expressing his fictitious devotion, maintaining the public facade. His deep voice carried an unsettling mix of warmth and control during their daily phone calls. Ellie confided in her best friend and fellow nurse, Chloe Miller, over late-night coffee. Chloe was equal parts horrified and thrilled. He's a mafia boss, Elle. A capo. You're leaving out a bad romance novel, but honestly, if he makes Brandon disappear, he's a saint in a suit, Chloe declared, stirring her coffee with manic energy. But seriously, Elle, he's Volpe. He's dangerous. I know, Chloe, Ellie sighed. But he's a known danger. Brandon was the kind that blindsides you. Dante is the kind that you can see coming. And right now, I need the protection he offers. Life briefly settled into a strange rhythm. Daytime Ellie was the calm, dedicated pediatric nurse. Nighttime Ellie was the mysterious, untouchable fiancé of the city's most dangerous man. It was on the third evening that the facade cracked and the real danger walked in. Ellie had driven back to her small, quiet apartment near Logan Square to collect a few more uniforms and Clara's favorite, threadbare stuffed dog, Barnaby. She had grown accustomed to the discreet presence of Dante's men, but tonight, they seemed oddly distant, shadowing her from across the street. The moment she turned the key, she knew. The familiar smell of dust and old heating oil was overlaid by the sharp tang of cold air and pulverized glass. Adrenaline spiked, raw and immediate. Clara was thankfully still with Chloe. The living room window was shattered, not carefully cut by a burglar, but brutally punched in, the glass lying in menacing shards on her threadbare rug. Inside, nothing seemed stolen, the TV was still there, the meager electronics untouched. This was not a robbery. This was a message. On the newly purchased white sofa, someone had left a piece of raw, stained burlap. Scrawled onto the fabric in thick, black ink was a vicious, stylized drawing of a two-headed bear, a crude, menacing emblem Ellie recognized from crime documentaries. It was the symbol of the Bratva, the Russian mafia, led by Viktor Khrushchev. Pinned beneath the burlap, driven deep into the sofa cushion, was a single, folded piece of paper. Ellie's hands trembled violently as she pulled it free. Her name, Eleanor Hayes, was written in Cyrillic script. Below it, her work address, Street Jude's Pediatric Ward. The message was horrifyingly clear. We know your weakness. We know where to find her. She didn't call 911. She didn't call Chloe. She called the only number that mattered. Dante answered on the first ring, his voice smooth and controlled, demanding to know where she was. My apartment. The window is broken. There's a symbol. A bear. And a note with my name and the hospital on it. Her voice was thin, sharp with fear, betraying the rigid control she usually maintained. His response was immediate, chilling. The charm vanished, replaced by the cold, decisive authority of a man accustomed to crisis. Don't touch anything. Don't let anyone in. Get into the hall and wait. I'm 5 minutes away. Do not move, Eleanor. 4 minutes and 30 seconds later, two black SUVs screeched to a halt outside. Dante emerged, not alone, but with Silas, his massive, silent second-in-command, and two other men. Dante took one look at the shattered window, the burlap, and the crude, menacing bear symbol. His jaw tightened, and the mask of the charming businessman fell away completely. The danger she had sensed in him was now nakedly visible, an ice-cold, contained fury. He grabbed the note and scanned it, his dark eyes like chips of flint. St. Jude's. Bastards. Ellie, breathing shallowly, stepped into the wreckage of her living room, her voice shaking but firm. Tell me the truth, Dante. All of it. Now. This isn't a competition over restaurant distribution. That's the Bratva symbol. You are not a regular businessman. Dante didn't waste time with lies. He looked her directly in the eye, his dark pupils holding hers captive. No, Eleanor. I am not a legitimate businessman. I own restaurants, yes, but they are fronts. I am Dante Volpe. I am the Capo of the Volpe family. My family controls this city's financial underworld, the docks, the construction contracts, everything the Hayes family pretends doesn't exist. He gestured to the two-headed bear. That is the mark of Viktor Krusov. He is attempting to push into our territory and is looking for leverage. He knows I am under pressure to marry. He believes you are my real weakness, the civilian I truly love, that saint I cannot risk exposing to my world. You are the perfect, untouched pressure point. He stepped toward her, his proximity a dizzying blend of threat and promise. I need you to listen to me. The 30-day contract is finished. The facade is over. I am not paying you to pretend anymore. I am protecting you because you are now in danger because of me. And I will not tolerate this. Not for you, and certainly not for Clara. He called Silas over, issuing orders in rapid-fire Italian that even Ellie, who spoke no Italian, understood instantly. Get Chloe on the phone. She, Clara, and Eleanor will be moved immediately. Total lockdown. Nothing leaves this apartment until it is swept. Chloe doesn't deserve this. Ellie protested, the injustice cutting through her fear. And my job, I'm due back tomorrow. Your job is irrelevant next to your life, Dante stated, his tone brooking no argument. Chloe is your friend and confidant. She goes with you. You need a piece of the normal world to remain sane, and she is it. She will be compensated handsomely. Pack one suitcase. You will not return here. Within the hour, two unmarked cars transported them from the small, ordinary apartment to Dante's extraordinary world. His penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel high above the Gold Coast, offering a dizzying, three-sided view of Lake Michigan and the city skyline. It was cold, starkly luxurious, minimalist, and surrounded by a silent, invisible army of armed men. Silas, the unflappable second-in-command, showed them to their quarters, an entire wing of the penthouse, soundproofed and lavishly appointed, featuring a specialized playroom for Clara and a beautiful guest suite for Chloe. As Clara, wide-eyed but excited by the sheer size of the new apartment, chased Chloe through the halls, Ellie stood at the massive, floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the sparkling grid of Chicago lights. The city looked smaller, farther away, and less threatening from this height. Dante came up behind her, placing a large, warm hand on the cool glass beside her head. This is the only place in the city I can guarantee your complete safety, Eleanor. The house has defenses I won't bore you with. Krusov will not breach this. I regret that I dragged you into this war. No, Ellie said, turning to face him, the pediatric nurse facing the capo. You didn't drag me in. I signed your contract. I accepted your shield. I was already in a war with Brandon and now I'm in yours. But I need to know something, Dante. The question was the hardest she had ever asked. When this is over, when Krusov is gone, what happens to me and Clara? Do we just go back to my small apartment, or does the Capo's weakness remain a target for life? The question hung between them, heavy and sharp. Dante looked at her, and for the first time since the revelation, she saw a flicker of something beyond control, a brief hesitation, an acknowledgement of the profound consequence of his actions. When this is over, Dante said, his voice low and solemn, never breaking eye contact, we will discuss the future, Eleanor. But for now, you are safe. That is my only vow. He didn't promise to let her go. He promised safety. And in that dangerous new world, that felt like the most binding vow he could make. Part 3, True Love Amidst Dangerous Claws. The penthouse transformed, not into a cage, but into an unlikely bubble of domesticity shielded by layers of armed men and technological surveillance. Outside the reinforced windows, Chicago glittered, oblivious to the silent, invisible war being fought over its territory and its people. Inside, Ellie navigated a world of stark, intimidating luxury, yet found an unexpected pocket of peace. Dante Volpe was a man of routines, and his routines were the backbone of the household. He left before dawn for his offices, the legitimate fronts and the shadowed backrooms, and returned every evening by 7, a schedule he kept with military precision. Ellie, restricted from going back to work, filled her days tutoring Clara, reading the endless stack of medical journals she'd neglected, and engaging in fiercely competitive, high-stakes board games with Chloe in the oversized living room. The tension of their confinement should have strained their fake relationship to breaking point. Instead, the forced proximity stripped away the pretense, revealing the genuine, often jarring complexities of the man who led the Volpe empire. Ellie watched him. She watched how Dante, the ruthless Capo, dealt with his 5-year-old charge. Clara, unburdened by the understanding of danger, had immediately imprinted on him. She saw the serious man who gave her piggyback rides, who fixed her breakfast, and who listened with unwavering patience as she recounted her latest dreams. One afternoon, Dante found Clara struggling with a drawing of a complicated ship. He sat on the floor with her, shedding the formality of his power. He didn't just instruct, he taught. He meticulously showed her how to use perspective, how a pencil stroke could create the illusion of depth. A good strategist, Principessa, Dante murmured, his voice softer than Ellie had ever heard it, must always understand the angles. It is true for building an empire, and it is true for drawing a ship. Ellie watched from the doorway, immobilized. The Capo who commanded fear across the city was painstakingly instructing a small girl on how to shade a mast. He was gentle, his large hands guiding her small, clumsy ones with infinite care. It was the deepest cut through his iron veneer, and it redefined him in her eyes. He was not just a cold strategist, he was a man capable of profound, targeted affection. The connection between Dante and Clara became the secret language between Dante and Ellie. She realized that the gentle patience he showed Clara was not a performance, it was a fundamental part of him that the outside world, by necessity, never saw. He was meticulous, demanding, and utterly devoted to ensuring that Clara felt safe, cherished, and stimulated. Their conversations became less about logistics and more about ideology. Late one evening, after Silas had retreated and Chloe was asleep, Ellie found Dante on the terrace, staring at the distant city. "You don't belong here, Eleanor," he said, not as a judgment, but as a statement of fact. "And you do," she challenged, stepping closer. He smiled, a genuine, tired expression that briefly softened the hard lines of his face. "I was born here. I inherited this crown. My father was violent and short-sighted. I am merely more disciplined. I keep the peace by controlling the war. I provide order where there would be chaos. It is a necessary evil. But you love it, Ellie countered. You love the control. I love the stability it provides the few people I care about, he corrected, turning to face her fully. It allows me to protect them absolutely. And now, his eyes dropped to her hands, which were twisting unconsciously at her sides. It allows me to protect you. In that besieged environment, the lines between the fake engagement and real emotions blurred. Ellie found herself drawn to his raw, unapologetic honesty and the sheer protective force he exerted. She had spent years holding herself together with sheer will. Dante was offering to be her bedrock, however dark that foundation might be. He offered a sense of security that her old life, with all its civility, had lacked. One night, exhausted by the day's constant, low-level vigilance, Ellie confessed her past anxieties about Brandon, her family's disappointment, and the guilt she carried for leaving medical school. Dante didn't offer platitudes. He simply took her hand, his thumb tracing the pulse point on her wrist. Guilt is a wasted emotion, Kara, he instructed. You left the pursuit of healing for the act of nurturing. You chose the harder path, the braver one. The only mistake you made was allowing that worthless man to degrade you. That is over now. You and Clara are safe here. You are not a pawn, Eleanor. You have become my most valuable asset. It was not a declaration of romantic love, but it was something deeper, a recognition of her worth and a promise of possession. And Ellie, the saint, found herself leaning into the dark promise of the serpent. The intimacy, however, was quickly overshadowed by the necessity of the war. While Dante handled the territorial countermeasures, Silas and his team were relentlessly hunting the source of the leak, the person who had exposed Ellie and Clara to Krusov. Silas, a man built like a fortress with eyes that missed nothing, presented his findings to Dante one afternoon in the high-tech communication room. Ellie was reading nearby, but the tone of their voices drew her attention. The information was proprietary, Capo. Not widely known, Silas reported, his voice a low rumble. Only a handful of Volpe associates knew of the fake engagement pressure. And the only person who knew Ellie Hayes' full personal history, the old apartment, the hospital shift patterns, the ex-husband, was someone close to her family, someone who also had ties to the Russian network. They displayed a complicated, interconnected digital map on the screen. Lines crisscrossed between Chicago socialites, Volpe shell companies, and known Bratva debtors. I cross-referenced the names Krusov's men have recently acquired debt from, Dante said, his finger stabbing at the map. The Russians don't usually take paper from the Gold Coast crowd, only from the peripheral gamblers, the desperate ones. The ones who have something to trade. Silas zoomed in on a cluster of connected nodes. One name, standing out from the anonymous aliases, made Ellie's breath catch, Marcus Hayes. Marcus Hayes, Dante confirmed, his voice flat, emotionless. Ellie's cousin. A pathetic gambler. Deeply in debt to a number of underground operators, specifically those controlled by Krusov's lieutenant, Jaeger. Ellie stumbled forward, gripping the back of a leather chair. Marcus? No. He wouldn't. He's weak, but his family. Dante looked at her, his dark eyes radiating cold certainty. Weakness is how men like Krusov recruit Eleanor. Marcus had no money. He had one thing of value, information on someone I presented as my future wife. He sold your life, your child's safety, for a temporary deferment on his gambling debt. The betrayal was a sickening, profound shock. It was worse than Brandon's abuse or her family's snobbery. It was a dagger from within her own bloodline. Marcus, whom she had known since childhood, had delivered her to the wolves. Where is he? Ellie whispered, the saint's resolve turning to ice. Krusov has him, Silas answered grimly. He seized him as collateral after the threat was sent to you. Krusov doesn't let valuable informants walk free. Marcus is bait. Bait to force my hand. Dante moved away from the screen, his mind clearly already racing ahead, formulating the counter-strike. Kruzov wants to meet, or he wants Marcus's debt paid, or both. He sees an opportunity to destabilize me. He believes he can use my weakness, you, to force me to yield territory. He looked at Ellie, his expression hardening into the capo she knew. I will not yield territory. But I will not allow you to remain leverage. Kruzov must be shown that you are not a weakness to me, but an extension of my power. And for that, I need to go see him. Tonight. Part 4, The Fateful Confrontation. The air in the penthouse was electric with contained tension. Dante was in his element, transforming from the affectionate protector into the cold, sharp weapon he truly was. Silas was loading a specialized duffel bag with tactical gear. The plan was a high-stakes chess move. Dante would meet Victor Kruzov alone, backed only by Silas acting as a silent bodyguard, in a neutral, abandoned warehouse on the city's south side. Ellie stood in the doorway, watching the preparations. Her fear was a sharp, cold knot in her stomach, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, unfamiliar resolve. She understood the mechanics of the threat. Kruzov believed Ellie was Dante's emotional center, his Achilles heel. A cornered animal, Dante was preparing to offer significant economic concessions to retrieve Marcus and secure a promise of no future targeting. She realized, with chilling clarity, that the act of protecting her was making Dante predictable, and therefore vulnerable. You're going to offer him the 3 disputed city blocks, Ellie stated, her voice surprisingly steady, cutting through the low murmur of Italian strategy. Dante stopped adjusting his cufflink, his eyes snapping up to meet hers. That is one possibility. The details are not your concern, Eleanor. They are entirely my concern, she retorted, walking into the room. Her nurse's uniform was replaced by the simple, dark clothing she'd chosen for her confinement, a pragmatic armor. You are going to trade something irreplaceable, territory, resources, leverage, for me, for the idea that I am a threat to your stability. Kruzov will walk away knowing he can always repeat the leverage play, just with a different target. Your safety is non-negotiable, Dante stated, his tone brooking no argument. I will pay the price. He will be dealt with afterward, I promise you. No, Ellie challenged, stepping directly into his personal space. She looked up at the towering capo, her heart pounding against her ribs, but her gaze refusing to drop. You are going because Kruzov thinks I am a passive victim. He thinks I am a civilian who will paralyze the great Dante Volpe with fear. I refuse to be the ransom, Dante. I refuse to be the weakness. Her conviction hit him with the force of a physical blow. His expression, usually so composed, fractured with disbelief and a flash of alarm. You are going nowhere, he commanded, the voice of the capo, full of unyielding power. Then your plan is flawed, Ellie shot back, her voice low and intense. If I don't go, Kruzov is trading a low-life gambler for your resources. If I go, I prove to him that I am your strength, not your constraint. He needs to see that the woman he thought was a simple nurse is the one standing between him and your surrender. She held his gaze, willing him to understand. Let me neutralize the leverage. Let me show him that the cost of touching the Volpe family is not just paid in territory, but in encountering something he didn't factor in, my resolve. Dante took a moment, his strategic mind rapidly processing the impossible equation. Her presence was an enormous risk, but her argument was irrefutable. Kruzov had calculated on fear and compliance. Ellie offered audacious defiance. He could trade territory, or he could trade the narrative. Silas, Dante spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. Get her an armored vest. Make it discreet. She rides in my car. Silas, ever loyal and unflappable, simply nodded, his eyes expressing a mixture of grim approval and professional anxiety. The warehouse district was dark, silent, and bitterly cold. Dante's black SUV pulled into the agreed-upon, isolated meeting point, a cavernous, empty space illuminated only by a single bare bulb overhead. Khrushchev and 3 of his hulking bodyguards were already waiting. Dante stepped out first, Silas following, positioned to defend. Then, with calculated deliberation, Dante opened the rear door, and Eleanor Hayes, the saint, stepped into the Serpent's war. Ellie's heart felt like a trapped bird, but she straightened her shoulders, drawing on the years of controlled chaos in the emergency room. She walked to Dante's side, standing slightly ahead of him, her body posture radiating not aggression, but an unnerving lack of fear. Viktor Khrushchev was massive, his face scarred and his expression perpetually contemptuous. He took one look at Ellie, and a flicker of genuine surprise crossed his features. "The legend is true," Khrushchev drawled in heavily accented English, looking Dante up and down. "Dante Volpe allows his weakness to walk into my sight. You have become sentimental, Capo." Dante's expression remained glacial. "She is not my weakness, Victor. She is my witness. You will state your demand." Khrushchev smiled, a cold, predatory flash of teeth. "We need the 3 blocks, Volpe. And we need the woman, for a short time, to ensure your cooperation. She will stay with us until the contracts are signed. She is the insurance." He gestured toward Marcus Hayes, who was visible in the shadows, bound, bruised, and clearly terrified. "Or perhaps you prefer to trade for the pathetic cousin, who sold her out." This was Ellie's moment. She took a single, deliberate step forward, separating herself from Dante. The gesture was small but monumental. Khrushchev's bodyguards tensed. "I am Eleanor Hayes," she said, her voice clear, carrying authority despite its lack of volume. "And I speak for the Capo. I am not a pawn, Khrushchev. I am not collateral. My daughter and my life were exposed by the man you hold." She nodded toward Marcus, dismissing him with a glance. "He is irrelevant. A failed strategy." She met Khrushchev's eyes, holding the gaze of the most brutal man in the city. "You are trying to use my fear to paralyze the man I love. But you have failed. The fear is gone. You have nothing to threaten us with now. You can take my life here tonight, but you cannot take away our resolve. I am not a hostage, and I will not be used to weaken my man." Khrushchev stared at her, utterly taken aback. The boldness, the lack of flinching, the sheer, irrational courage of the woman he had believed to be a simple, easily terrified nurse, was staggering. Dante, meanwhile, watched Ellie, his carefully constructed composure momentarily abandoned. Pride, awe, and a fierce, terrifying intensity radiated from him. This was the woman he had chosen, the saint who had walked into the jaws of the Serpent's war. Dante stepped up beside her, his hand settling on her shoulder, a gesture that was now one of partnership, not ownership. "She speaks the truth, Victor," Dante said, his voice now a venomous promise. "The deal is changed. You will take the 3 blocks, yes. But you will also accept this." Dante produced a small, encrypted thumb drive, tossing it carelessly onto a crate near Khrushchev. That drive contains full financial details, offshore accounts, and a complete logistical breakdown of the Yakuza's new operation in Seattle. A shared problem is better than a local feud. You use that to expand elsewhere, and you leave Chicago alone. You release Marcus immediately, and you swear a blood oath to me, and to my woman, that you will never, ever target the Hayes name again. Khrushchev looked at the drive, then at Dante, and finally back at the unflinching Ellie. The woman was not a weakness, she was a catalyst. She had just granted Dante the courage to offer an unbeatable, strategic trade that offered Khrushchev far greater long-term gain than 3 blocks of docks. A slow, calculating smile spread across Krusov's face. Say, he breathed out, nodding. The Capo's woman has steel. It is a new game, Volpe. Agreed. The Hayes name is off limits. For the promise of Seattle, we take the blocks and the gambler. Go. The transaction was swift. Marcus was unceremoniously shoved toward Silas, who quickly secured him and called for extraction. Krusov's men melted into the shadows, leaving Dante and Ellie alone in the cold, empty warehouse. The danger had passed. Ellie let out a shaky breath, finally allowing the adrenaline to subside. Dante turned to her, his dark eyes blazing with an emotion she couldn't name. He didn't speak. He simply pulled her against his chest, the sheer force of his emotion shattering his reserve. His mouth found hers in a kiss that was sudden, fierce, and utterly possessive, a public declaration that erased every fake moment and every fear. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers. "The contract is broken, Eleanor," he murmured, his voice husky with raw feeling. "The facade of the Capo and his saint is over. This is real. You are my family now." Part 5, A New Life and the Proposal. The defeat of Victor Krusov marked not an end, but a beginning. The air in the penthouse, once charged with vigilance and fear, now settled into a deep, domestic security. Krusov's vow, given in the presence of the woman who dared to confront him, was considered absolute. Dante Volpe's family was untouchable. Ellie, however, refused to allow the Capo's world to completely consume her. 2 weeks after the confrontation, she insisted on returning to St. Jude's. She needed the grounding of her work, the tangible reality of healing children, and the maintenance of her hard-won independence. She returned not just as a nurse, but as a woman who knew her own strength, now guarded by men who moved like shadows and reported only to Dante. Her return to normalcy was short-lived. The final, petty threat to her new life came not from the sophisticated savagery of the Bratva, but from the predictable malice of her past. Brandon Scott, humiliated by his public dismissal at the wedding and now reeling from Dante's quiet financial destruction of his career, found her at the pediatric ward. He sidled up to her during a shift change, his face pale with fury and desperation. "The great Capo's whore," Brandon sneered, low enough not to draw attention. "You think you've won? He can't protect you from everything, Elle. I know what he is. I can call CPS. I can report that my daughter is living in a mob boss's fortress. They'll take Clara away from both of us, and I will watch your world burn, just because you think you're above me." His threat was cold, calculated, and aimed directly at the jugular, Clara. It was the one thing that still had the power to paralyze her. Before Ellie could respond, a familiar, smooth voice cut through the sterile hospital corridor. "That will not be happening, Mr. Scott." Dante and Silas materialized, not from a shadowed corner, but walking down the hall with an air of casual, overwhelming authority that silenced the entire ward. They were dressed in impeccable suits, yet they radiated latent power that turned the hospital lighting dim. Dante didn't physically threaten Brandon. He didn't need to. He approached Brandon with the calm precision of a surgeon. Silas handed Dante a thick manila envelope. "Brandon," Dante's voice was lethal, quiet, and utterly devoid of emotion. "The days of harassing Eleanor are finished. You are attempting to leverage a child you haven't supported in 5 years. We have assembled a comprehensive legal file, courtesy of the Volpe Intelligence Network." Dante opened the envelope, not allowing Brandon to touch it. "This contains documented evidence of 5 years of tax evasion, detailed records of your illegal gambling debts, the same ones that link you to the Russian network, and a clear pattern of neglecting your financial obligations to Clara. If you pursue a custody case, these files will go directly to the IRS, the state licensing board for your job, and the district attorney. Dante's eyes narrowed, a single, sharp command. You will sign this document, permanently relinquishing all parental rights, custody, and visitation rights to Clara Hayes. In exchange, these files vanish and you are allowed to rebuild your pathetic life far from Chicago. If you hesitate, if you call, or if you even look in Eleanor's direction again, I will ensure you spend the next 10 years trying to explain these figures to a federal judge. Faced with absolute destruction of his life and freedom, Brandon crumbled. He was not a warrior, he was a coward. With a trembling hand, he scrawled his signature on the document, abandoning his daughter forever for his own survival. Dante took the signed papers, a contract of permanent peace, and nodded to Silas, who escorted the defeated men out. The war was finally, definitively over. 2 weeks later, the Volpe Hayes family held an intimate dinner at Dante's flagship restaurant. It was a calculated move, a public show of unity and strength. Present were Ellie's initially bewildered, now begrudgingly respectful family, and Dante's extended, imposing Volpe relatives. The dinner was a success. As the night drew to a close, Dante drew Ellie aside, leading her to a private table adorned with white roses, a stark contrast to the black market deals that were conducted in the rooms above. He took her hands, his touch warm and steady. "Eleanor," he began, his voice surprisingly thick with emotion. "When I met you, I needed a shield to protect my business. You, instead, taught me that a true shield is a partner. You taught me to love, and you and Clara gave me the family I never dared to want." He dropped to one knee, the Capo of Chicago, making the ultimate surrender. At that moment, Clara, coached by Silas, skipped into the room. In her hands, she held a small, velvet box. She beamed at Dante, then at Ellie. "Mommy, look. Papa Dante wants to give you a pretty rock." Ellie's eyes blurred with tears of joy. She looked at the diamond, magnificent and